Good morning. This is the Climate Change Committee meeting scheduled for today. We have had people sign in who are physically present and those that are virtually present. I've noted that on our roll call list, and we do have a quorum. So if we can now stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So our last meeting was held on September, and we have circulated the minutes for that meeting. What I'd like to do, that was September 7th, 2024. Has everybody had an opportunity to review those? Is there anybody that is seeking any kind of a modification or correction of any nature to those minutes?
Just one, but I think it already got fixed. Was it the ending time at the very end? Said that it ended at 1:39 or something. Did it went that long?
That is what Dave Thomas has recorded.
Yeah, it was long.
So it was a long meeting.
Okay, I wasn't here, so I'm just.
It was a long meeting. And we'll do our best in the future to try to keep it to 1 hour, hour and a half at the longest.
It's easy when you look at the video because you get the time readout
Okay.
down to the minute.
Can I have a motion on adopting the minutes, please?
Motion to adopt.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Yeah.
All in favor? Any opposition? The minutes from September 7th have been adopted. Can I have a motion on the adoption of the agenda? I assume everybody's reviewed it. Is there a motion to accept this agenda as drafted and published?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor of adopting the agenda?
Aye.
Any opposition? With no opposition, the agenda for today has been accepted. So as everybody should be aware, we had a meeting scheduled for last November, but unfortunately we didn't have a quorum, so the meeting did not proceed. So we have taken the agenda that had been published and added to it based on what has transpired since then. So I want to turn it over to Sally, as Dave Davis is virtual and not feeling his best this morning. If you can discuss what has gone on regarding your interactions with the marketing committee. And I believe you had designed a role for yourself on that committee. If you could address that, please.
Sure. Yes, back in the fall, I attended a marketing committee meeting and had a substantive communication conversation with Alex, the marketing chair. And at that time, I shared with him the 2-page outline that we had put, we had looked at here. And in conversation with him, he seemed to feel that the marketing committee as it was probably not going to be able to give us the support that we needed to, given the size, the stature, and just the duration of the public education campaign. That's not what they do. So, and he stressed the fact that they are all volunteers and, they're mostly focused around doing events, like the tree lightings and the things that happen, that for the community at large. And then I had a subsequent conversation, and I could actually see and go in that meeting. Their meeting lasts like 40 minutes. In subsequent communication with Dave Paul Bauer and with you, Deborah, I did throw out the idea that I could at least get us going in terms of drafting some public education materials to get the ball rolling, at least get this started. And then I further offered to, I asked you to consider the possibility of me also taking a seat on the marketing committee to kind of bridge the gap between the two committees. And it might just streamline the process it might just streamline the process if I don't even know who's chairing that committee right now, so.
Gary, do you know who's chairing the committee?
We don't have a chair, do we?
I don't think so.
Last time I
Alex was
talked
the
to
chair.
Yeah. Last time I talked to Paul Bauer, he was still looking for a chair. So, and there's nothing on the
I
schedule as far as I
gracefully
know for the
declined.
committee to meet.
Once it gets a chairperson, what does the town need to do so that she can be effectively a liaison between the two committees?
Well, that I kind of covered in, I also came up with kind of, I think, a process for what we need to do starting today, going forward. So we have a very clear-cut, well-defined process for how this is gonna flesh out. Going back to the marketing committee, although I haven't seen a formal approval, Paul Bauer seemed to think it would be a very good idea for me to sit on the committee. So in terms of the path forward, my thought process is we need to do a couple of things. Maybe convene, have a Zoom meeting sometime in the next 30 days. It doesn't have to be everybody, but it should be, whoever you think needs to be involved in this. We need to identify the topics that we want to address during this fiscal year, keeping in mind this is going to be a multi-year project. So some of it's going to be introductory materials, some of it will be, whatever we choose to talk about in this fiscal year. Also, I think it's important to have a sense of what we think the timing should be in terms of dissemination of those materials. Do we want to disseminate information monthly, bi-monthly? And also in what format? Do we want to just have very short little blurbs and then a lot of hyperlinks? So that's something to be considered. And then getting to what you were talking about, Deborah, to the extent possible, establish a clearly defined process for moving things through the pipeline, so to speak. So assuming there's draft materials, who needs to look at them? Who needs to be able to recommend changes, edits, that kind of thing? And then, once that is done, I'm assuming our committee needs to approve whatever has been put together. And it would be, at that point in time, I'm assuming that it would go to the marketing committee for their approval and dissemination.
So sometimes before things go out, they should be recommended to the commissioners sometimes. So the commissioners actually get to review it and vote on it before it's put out as some type of town information, or not a policy, but information representing the towns. So just kind of keep that in mind, that the commissioner should probably review it at some point also.
So the first thing I would like to find out is how do we get her to be officially recognized to be in this liaison position so that once there is a marketing chairperson, she can start working with that committee and with ours and have the credentials that she needs to be able to make this go smoothly.
We just need to get an agenda item for the commissioners meeting that would add her to the marketing committee.
And then we could have some additional designation as liaison. I don't think we have any official positions or designations like that, but I don't see any reason why we can't create something like that. But it does take a vote of the commissioners to add you.
I did very clearly express to Paul Bauer that this would be my only job on the marketing committee,
Okay.
to work on the public education
Okay.
materials. I mean, I'll go to every committee meeting.
Yeah, I don't think Paul will have any objections.
No.
So if we were to vote today that it be brought to the commissioners for a formal vote, her having the official title of the liaison between, is that something you would be able to bring soon to the powers that be?
Yes. I don't know whether or not, I'm just looking at the agenda, was a formal vote is the right way to go. Normally if we're going to have a formal vote, it needs to be on the agenda. But just a general agreement that this is a good strategy. I don't see a problem with going ahead and including an item like that on the commissioner's agenda and getting approval for that. Let me ask a question though, and this kind of dovetails, I think, or maybe it should dovetail with another discussion item about the information that's currently being provided to potential property owners regarding flooding on Dewey Beach. This is all kind of the same thing. I know Mary is on the line, and maybe she wants to talk about this too, but it just seems to me that those two things, what Sally has been working on with Dave Davis and what Mary have been working on, really need to come together, I think.
That was my impression, that agenda item A and C have an overlap that way.
A and F is.
A and F is,
Yeah,
okay.
that's what I'm looking
So
I-
do
I-
we want to hear from Mary on that and get some input?
Sure, yes. I wasn't clear on what I was supposed to do until I saw the agenda, to be honest. But from what I've seen, there's not a whole lot of communication, which I think participating into the marketing meeting would be probably our best move. And talking to all of like the neighbors, and nobody's aware of any climate concerns or initiatives or even our committee. So I've just been personally trying to promote us.
But the town does have information on the website.
Yeah, so on the town website, under property owners, you have basic flood information, preparing for a flood, consider flood protection measures, and that's something the commissioners have been working on with planning and zoning and with charter and code about raising the FEMA, so FEMA +2, making it optional for FEMA +3. They also have advice on how to get the flood insurance policy, and also to set up a meeting with Dawn so you can talk about your property and what flood zone it's in, and then they also talk about special flood zone. That's all on the town website under property owners. If you go under
Right.
property
I was
owners,
thinking
then
more of
then
like,
you go under flood information.
I
Then
think
there's
that,
extra information there that Kate was just showing.
I think Dawn addressed that when we last met, and she explained that it's all there and that annually she does an extra step where she sends out some information to property owners. So I'm wondering if the information appears to be there, but perhaps people aren't aware that it is there, and maybe that needs to be more of the focus, is for
Right.
people to be aware that it's there. And
yeah, I think like in the middle of the summer or beginning of the summer, if we did something to promote, whether it's a drop off or emails, or 'cause I just think the awareness at the beginning of the season would be helpful. But do some kind of a promotion, like a marketing effort.
Bethany that had a brochure that they shared with us.
Yeah, Bethany.
Bethany had a brochure. That might be an expensive undertaking.
And
But
I
it was
think
nice.
And I think one of the points
Like a
that
threefold.
was brought up, and I think this is the point that could be a big sticking point, is should there be some disclosure of flood zone information in real estate, transactions?
so that's a pretty hot issue,
I know.
because people that may want to sell their property don't necessarily want to be more than they have to compliant with disclosing that there may be a flooding issue. And I think that that was something we touched upon at the last meeting, is that that may not be very popular. But to existing homeowners, perhaps making them aware of all of the wealth of information that's online So at least they would be able to see that, but it sounds to me like Mary and you would need to work together
Right.
to make that next step. But in the interim, I want to go back to your being the liaison and make sure that there is no objection from this committee to her serving back and forth. While I don't think we technically have a right to object to her being on any committee she wishes to be, but I did want to open it up for discussion as to anybody that has any concerns about that happening.
Three thoughts. The first is, the town manager does a monthly newsletter.
We do, I've got that written down here.
And maybe there could be a climate change corner
There could be.
or subsection.
There could be a link
And
from
that
the
would be
newsletter
the
also to our
opportunity
town
to
website.
vet it through the commissioners.
Yeah.
You know, so that you do have that. And then, once it's been in the newsletter, maybe it can be supplemented through other methodologies because it's been vetted and published in the one place. And then if you're gonna have an Earth Day or some event or other thing, okay, you've got it there, it's been reviewed.
So I think that's all part of the kind of recommendations that they're discussing, but we need to make sure that we first recognize that a liaison between the two committees would be very helpful.
Right.
And so returning to that, is there anybody that has any concerns about that occurring?
Well, that was my third point. I thought it's a good idea that Sally would be involved that way.
So,
My second point was that I think you raised a good point. My understanding of the two recommendations that Lewis had come up with, one of them had been this real estate disclosure. And I think there was blowback, and I think it did come from people who had property and it was on the market and, hey, what are you doing? You know? So there's a little bit of,
I do think there's reluctance, but I also think it's
the
common.
past is prologue.
But I think it's common practice though.
Yeah,
I
if
think
you,
most communities are doing that.
yes, there's a movement in that direction.
Yeah.
Lewis had it,
And,
and you know, when you observe, you know, okay.
and when, like, I just applied for a building permit to do something on my deck, there's an assumption from the town, you know what flood zone you're in and what, you know. So we all discuss it as if everybody knows.
Well, there's another aspect of that, if I may say so, and that is our flood maps here in Dewey date to 2014. They're supposed to be updated under a 5-year cycle. And I'm not sure of what the prospective date is in the coming 2 or 3 years, but as of 4 or 5 months ago, the final rulemaking was done that now for the first time when flood maps are prepared, they shall have climate change factored into it.
And is that coming from FEMA?
That's coming from the federal government, yeah.
so
And
I want to stay on topic so we can make progress. So I'm going to go back to the liaison
so those
issue.
maps are not static is my point.
So-
Thanks.
I'm not hearing any opposition to having this liaison. Should we have a formal vote on it? Is that okay? Or because it's not specifically the
I
agenda?
don't
Or we
know.
don't need it?
I would have a vote because it can't hurt,
Okay.
right?
Yeah, I suppose it's fine,
Right.
yeah.
So can I have a motion that we vote on this?
I make a motion to have Sally become a liaison from this committee to the marketing committee.
And can we have a second on the motion?
I'll second that.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Wonderful, thank you. I did want, before we move on to the other agenda items, I just want to remind everybody that in addition to the educational element that we are very much focused on in this committee, we need to go back to what was voted on June 11th of all of the different issues and goals and focal points. And they are delineated in those minutes. And specifically, there was creating a resiliency fund, which is an issue we're going to address and does periodically come up. The storm reconstruction ordinance and taking a look at that. And I want to remind everybody that if you look online, the Climate Change Committee, the focus, what it specifically says is develop plans and recommendations to the Town Council for a responsible strategy and resilience to rising sea levels and protect Duty Beach in the face of climate change. And then it goes through with 6 bulleted objectives. And so I encourage everybody to reread those, because while education is clearly an important thing for us to do, we also need to remain mindful of the other objectives that were voted on by the last committee. So that if between now and the next meeting, if everybody can reread those, and so that we make sure that we address all those items, I'd appreciate it. So Sally, was there more you wanted to share about the marketing committee interactions?
No, I just think in general, I think in order to get something done, I think I kind of feel like, because I'm sure they only meet every other month like we do. So I don't want to be in a position where we're approving materials 2 days after they've had their meeting, and then it's not going to go out for another 2 months. So that's why I said I feel like we need to have a clearly defined process for how this is going to work. And I did not know that it should go to the commissioners.
Well, the final content of materials would have to come to the commissioners, but you can develop the process and get marketing's input, and all of that can be synthesized into the recommendation to the commissioners.
So what I'm hearing is that you will be ultimately appointed as the liaison, and you're going to be working with Mary as we make progress in that regard. And that brings me to discussion item B. This is something that has come up a number of times with questions to me. If you would be so kind, Darius, to please explain, when we vote on things here, procedurally, what you do with that information so that everybody understands how that vote gets transferred into actions.
Okay, sure. Well, I put some notes together. I guess, first of all, in anticipation of our last meeting here, but also use this for the meeting that Kelly and Dave Thomas and I attended in South Bethany, which I think was a very useful meeting. We'll probably talk about that some more. But in terms of the recommendations that the committee voted on already, the first one was increase the freeboard in the 100-year floodplain. There was not a specific recommendation from this committee in terms of how many feet the freeboard might be increased by, but it was a general recommendation that we revisit that and then increase the freeboard. So as that recommendation went through planning and zoning and to the commissioners, it came forward with a recommendation of let's increase the freeboard from 1 foot to 3 feet. During the discussion at planning and zoning, it was a unanimous recommendation to support the 3 feet, the increase to 3 feet, but there was still some hesitation. There were some members of the Planning and Zoning Commission that, while they supported it, they were a little bit worried about unintended consequences. And I think of the flavor of that kind of discussion carried over to the discussion among the commissioners. There was some concern about, well, if you're going to build a building next door to my existing building, you can now build it 2 feet higher than you could have beforehand, and that's going to block my view of the bay or the ocean, whichever the case may be. We sort of got past that, and there was a lot of concern at the commissioners' meeting about, well, what does this mean for existing properties, particularly for old properties? Are they going to be able to deal with this? And if they want to renovate their property, virtually any renovation they do is going to hit the 50% cost of the structure level, which means they're going to have to meet all of the FEMA requirements. Are they going to be able to do that under the existing code? And I think there was some concern that they couldn't. I think some of that was not well founded. But nevertheless, with the cautions, the sort of cautious feeling that people had, we decided to increase the freeboard, the mandatory freeboard, to 2 feet instead of 3. And that takes place, I think we did that in November, I believe.
In April 1st?
Yeah, so I think that will kick in April 1st. We wanted to give property owners who were in the process of constructing a new property an opportunity to go ahead and get their plans done without having to meet that requirement. But April 1st, it will kick in for any new construction. or any renovation that would require meeting those FEMA requirements. The other thing that we did, and we just started to do this at the last meeting in December of the commissioners, we decided to offer an optional opportunity. If someone wants to go beyond the 2 feet and increase the freeboard up to another additional foot, they could have a corresponding increase in maximum height. So that is still in process. We referred that to planning and zoning because it requires a change not only to section 101, which is our flood damage reduction section of the code, but also to our zoning code, because it does affect the provisions that regard maximum height. That was supposed to be addressed at the last planning and zoning meeting, and unfortunately, that meeting had to be canceled because it had been advertised as a Zoom meeting, and the communications equipment here failed for whatever reason. And so that meeting had to be canceled. So the planning and zoning still has to take a look at that, then it would come back to the commissioners, and we would then have a chance to approve that. We'll see whether or not there is support for that. But that doesn't get us to a mandatory 3 feet, but does provide an additional opportunity for property owners who want to take some, or provide some additional protection for their property. One of the other things that was voted on, I think, by the committee was in regard to resiliency fund. I did take that to the commissioners in November. We had a good discussion about that. There was some concern that perhaps we need to wait until the town hall project is a little more clear in terms of the cost before we make any specific decisions on the fund. And I think, we got the bids on the new town hall yesterday. We got 6 bids. There's a lot of work to be done. There are a lot of moving pieces. Not only are we talking about cost of the town hall, we're also in the middle of our FY26 budget process. And then we want to talk about a resiliency fund. I think in terms of creating a resiliency fund, I've always thought about this as maybe the infrastructure account that we already have being the seed money for that, or maybe we even need to open up a discussion about the beach fund at some point. That's a lot more complicated, requires a referendum to make some changes to that, but given what we face, I think in terms of climate risk, I think we need to open up all of these areas as possible discussion. Doesn't mean we'll do anything necessarily, but I think we at least need to consider that. So the town council, the commissioners did ask that we identify consultants perhaps who might help us in planning for a fund, and to understand really what we might be able to do with a fund like this as a small municipality, and what roles the federal and state agencies might play in terms of a resilience effort, both prospectively as well as after the fact, after we have some sort of a major climate event. Also to begin to look for some grant funds that might help in funding a consultant, and talk to Lewis, who is very much interested in establishing their own resiliency fund, as well as Bethany, who already has a fund, which they support through accommodations taxes and property taxes. Fenwick Island is also interested in doing something like this, but I think they're in a very preliminary stage of beginning to planning for a possible resiliency fund. I'm just going to cover the storm reconstruction ordinance. I think that was something else
Can
that
I just
was...
ask you a couple
Sure,
questions on
sure.
that? By our communicating with Lewis, Bethany, and possibly Fenwick, would that cause any kind of competition with us trying to obtain the same funds?
Potentially, there's always some kind of competition potentially out there, but I think we need to know. They're already applying for grants. They're probably applying, to the same
grants and other things.
to the same sort of agencies and sources of funds that any other community is doing. But I think, Bill mentioned BRIC grants. I think we need to know more about the BRIC grants, building resilient and infrastructure and communities. I think that's potentially a good source of funding. I know for sure that some of the other municipalities are seeking BRIC grants, but there's no reason why we shouldn't be in there trying as well for this kind of effort. So did you had other questions here?
I was just more concerned with that competition issue, and when you say that Fenwick is at a preliminary stage, do you believe they are where we are, or less production on that, or?
My impression is that they're not as far along perhaps as we are, the only information I have was in the slide presentation that I think everybody had shared, or with which, that we shared with everyone rather. And on there, there's some indication that they are considering planning for a resiliency fund. So, I think we're a little bit farther along. I think my impression is they're pretty preliminary, but, I think the agreement that we had, was Dave and Kelly and I kind of shared our notes from the South Bethany meeting, is that we need to talk to Fenwick to find out more about what they're doing, because we don't have enough detail about what their efforts are.
And I think, big picture, sharing the bay, we probably have the most in common.
When I went to their meeting at the end of the summer last year, where those materials that we've put online came from, that was where I got the word grant-worthy from. They believe that to be competitive in getting grants and to be grant-worthy, one of the things in the process is the presence of a resiliency fund. And from my poking around, the next part of it is that beyond saying that you have a resiliency fund, when you apply for a grant, there needs to be a budget narrative that explains how much you're setting aside with this grant in mind, how you're going to fund it and pay for it, and so as to prevent program failure. That's just an overview sentence there. I think a number of years ago, there was less emphasis on that, at least as I remember it from the Rascal Summit. And then, okay, now it's becoming competitive, the funds aren't as abundant. You need to have a resiliency fund. And then I think it's gone to a step beyond that of, well, what is the budget narrative? What are the nuts and bolts? What is your thinking? How have you constructed it? And I think one of the concerns is that you set aside a little bit of money that'll cover a grant or two, and then you apply for 5 grants. Well, okay. There's something, something's going to give there.
So on that resiliency fund, I think Dave Davis, Sally, April, and Kelly were working on that. And with what Gary is sharing, I want to make sure we go to you all once he finishes to address what you have done, especially in light of what he has shared in that regard, and see what we can do to address those points that he's brought up.
I'd like to make just a couple of comments when the time is right, please.
Please.
Based on what Gary said, I think we have a sort of a waiting period here with the budget process and the town hall, project going on. I heard that, Gary, pretty loud and clear. So, but I do think that it could be an activity that we take on as a committee in the next several meetings to talk about what the definition of the resiliency fund would be, possible sources for it, a target amount that we think is necessary, mechanics of, how we would go about enacting it, and evaluate the different ways we could recommend. And then once we've done that, we can recommend that to the council and see what they think, and whatever other committees would need to weigh in on that. But I think there's work to be done. And then there's the secondary aspect, which is talking to the different towns and understanding exactly what they've got going, so we get that perspective as well. But it could be something that we, spend a little time in each of the next several meetings kind of digging deeper into and trying to get a feel for, how would we construct such a fund.
So with what you've said in mind, I have the 3 of you all listed as having been at the preliminary stages of looking into that, rather than us today directing somebody very specifically for each of the points that you've delineated, should we just have you all continue to work on that, perhaps bring an action outline to the next meeting, which you share with us in advance so it can be published, and taking into consideration not only the points that you've made, but the other issues that Gary has brought up that are kind of part and parcel with that. Would that work?
Yeah, I think that's reasonable, and we can meet in the meantime to construct that roadmap, so to speak.
So, so I think the first thing is defining it versus, you know, infrastructure versus big picture. Resilience is if we had a storm tomorrow, how do we recover? Is that what not like we're gonna put floodgates up at Indian River and.
But where are the
50 years
priorities?
from that.
What
So
is the,
resiliency is tomorrow there's a flood, what are we gonna do?
where is the money gonna go? So for example, way back when Milton redid all of their town, I mean, they really redid everything. They did a variety of priorities and which lands they were just going to effectively abandon and not agree
back to
to
river.
repave the roads each time. And some of it they turned into just playgrounds with permeable pavements. They did a variety of things of that sort. So it's a question of looking at what will that money go to? Where are the priorities? Are the priorities going to be making sure that the town hall, once built, is that the roads are all good for that and that the buildings stay safe? Are they going to be looking at our water table where the general water is coming into people's homes? I mean, where are we going to focus? Or are we going to be looking at individuals and making sure that the individual homes that we know, and without delineating them, we all know a few streets here that are regularly flooded. Are we going to keep taking money from this resiliency fund to help them out with continuing to pave the roads and things of that nature? So I think that's part of that. Without getting into the very specifics, we're going to be using permeable pavement, we're going to be doing this, we're going to be doing that. I mean, that may come down the road, but I think that's more for the town to deal with, but more broader strokes as I understand it. Can I have some input on that?
So all the streets are owned by the state. They've brushed off paving them twice now. They were supposed to be paved last spring. They were supposed to be paved this past fall. And then they canceled that after the issues at the north end of the inlet, with funding going there. And now we're rescheduled for this fall to have our streets paved, with the exception of first and second block at Chesapeake, the first block at Chesapeake, first and second block at Carolina, second block of Jersey, and second block of West Street. Those are owned by the town. So when I go to catch up with what the state's done, if they pave next fall, we will put in for CTF grants like we've done in the past, and hopefully pay for a majority of those projects with DELDOT funding. When it comes to the flooding from the bay, we have a $1 million grant that we've had with the Army Corps of Engineers out of Senator Kuhn's office. That'll be updated at the Infrastructure Committee meeting, which is scheduled for the 30th at, I believe, 3 p.m. Peter Gorey from the Army Corps will come down and update us on the project for Reed Street. The other project we have is on Van Dyke Street for the issues there with their stormwater pipes that are in the middle of the beach. We have a $37,000 grant we put in for to do a study there. That'll also be presented at the Infrastructure Committee meeting by JMT, who's the contractor that is going to be doing that study. And then there is the flooding issues up on Jersey Street, first and second block. I put in for a CTF grant and received $52,000 for that project. That'll also be presented on the 30th with the bids that come back in, the 3 bids that come back in. And then what will happen at the infrastructure meeting, there'll be a vote after the presentations are done on those projects. on a recommendation, does the town pay money from the infrastructure fund to finish those projects? So on the Jersey Street project, we got $52,000 from the state in a grant. We'll probably need another $50,000 to finish that project. On Van Dyke Street, we have $37,000 for that project. We're probably going to need another $50,000 there for that project. We have approximately $800,000 right now in our infrastructure budget. So the money's there for those type of projects. And that's kind of what the town's looking at for the next fiscal year. When we do our budget workshop next week, Friday at 3 p.m. in here, I'll have my infrastructure projections for the next 3 years. So like next year, I'm projecting we'll need about, counting the projects that I just talked about, we'll need about $300,000 for next year's projects. And then the following year will probably be about $150,000. And depending when the Army Corps starts working on Reed Street, that $1 million, we're on the hook for 20% of that. So I'll project that out in the budget workshop next week. So that kind of gives you a little bit. And then we put in we're working on a brick grant with GAP from the University of Delaware. Brick grant for about $375,000 for the new generator for the town hall. Now, the bids came in yesterday, and that included the contractor putting in the generator for the new town hall. But if we do get the grant from Brick, that'll come to the town to offset the money that we're spending for the generator for the new town hall. So that's kind of what we have going on. And we're working with Center of the Inland Bays on a living shoreline project that's about $550,000 that runs from Sunset Park over to McKinley Street. They are putting in for grants for that, and that is to stop beach erosion from Dagsworthy Street over to McKinley Street and assist in the flooding. So those are kind of what the town has going on for the next year to 2 years.
Question. You mentioned PTF grant,
CTS grant,
C-
Community Transportation Funding.
community,
Transportation Funding. Over the last 4 years, we've probably gotten $250,000 in those type of grants.
now was
What
that,
happens is you go through your representative, and at that time it was Pete Schwarzkopf and Ernie Lopez.
Mhm.
And then it was Pete Schwarzkopf and Russ Huxtable. And of course, Mr. Schwarzkopf is retired, so we'll be going through Mr. Huxtable and Representative Claire Hall.
okay. Now earlier I had another one down as DCF. Did I mishear that? Is
Yeah,
that,
it's all CTF.
it's all P,
CTA, Community
Charles
Transportation
Frank
Funds.
Thomas.
CTF?
Yeah.
Okay.
Charles Thomas Frank.
It was quick and I'm trying to, kind of the court
Community
reporter here.
Transportation Fund.
Okay.
So what I'm hearing with all of that, there's a lot going on, but there's still a lot that will need to be addressed. And so when the resiliency, I'm going to call it subcommittee, is contemplating the points that have been discussed, knowing that these projects are already underway is going to be important to figure out, again, with those different points, what do we need the resiliency fund for that isn't already being addressed? And how much would be anticipated? I'm hearing Bill say that he's looking 3 years out at a time. And so that's also something that needs to be contemplated. Are we looking for it on per year? Are we looking at it for 5 years from now? Exactly what would be contemplated. I also think it would be helpful when you all meet to perhaps find out who's writing the grants, the grant proposals for the town, so that you understand where that expertise may be, what grants, rather than recreating the wheel.
Who does what?
Grants are already being tapped and what other resources may be there as part of your general overview when you start this. And obviously this is going to be a long range work, but at least you'd be able to give the starting of an outline that perhaps you all could prepare and bring to our next meeting. Would that be something that sounds workable?
Yeah.
Great.
Great.
Deborah,
Sounds
just
good.
a quick
What-
point.
Sure,
sorry.
please.
So I think with trying to figure out where the resiliency fund will go, I think it's important to do what Fenwick Island has already done, and that is bring in a consultant to create a resiliency plan. They had done it in 2015 and they updated it last year. And this is something, if you go back and look at the comprehensive plan for the town of Dewey Beach, it was recommended to us to establish a similar resiliency plan or strategy. And in this plan, if you go and look at the one for Fenwick, they outline, all the vulnerable areas in Fenwick that are vulnerable to sea level rise, and kind of prioritize those areas. And then later on in that plan, they go over, a timeline of short range to mid range to long range projects, and help kind of determine what kind of funding is needed for each of those projects. So, what kind of money is used to bring in a consultant to create that plan is one thing, but I think once we have that plan, we'll have a much better idea of what we need this resiliency fund for.
Would you like to join that subcommittee with Dave Davis, Sally, April, and Kelly to
Sure.
that?
Yeah, to your point, I do think this requires expertise that none of us have.
Oh, I would agree.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
knowing that that's something that we need to do
Right.
becomes part of the action plan that we recommend for the town to consider. So I don't contemplate that our committee would find the consultants or anything of that sort, but more to make the recommendation that this is what we think should happen. Here, we think the resiliency fund needs to be established. Here's what its goals would be. Here's what needs to be done to implement that, which would include contracting out to a consultant.
Right, finding a consultant to organize the team of consultants.
Yeah.
Well,
The consultant for the consultant.
it would be helpful if through the work that the committee does, and then maybe this is discussions with other municipalities, to identify some names of possible consultants. I mean, I'm not,
Yeah.
I think that would be very helpful, very important.
So if
and
you
it-
could put that on your action list
And
as
I
part of the committee.
Just want to reinforce one other
Yeah.
point. I think it's important for us to know how Dewey Beach is different from other municipalities. It's pretty clear from what Bill just said that there's a lot going on that comes under the heading of resiliency. There's already a lot that the town is doing, but we are different. We don't have responsibility for most of the roads in Dewey Beach.
Water or sewer.
Water or sewer.
Right.
We don't own bulkheads like some of the other municipalities do. So, both the size and the use of a resiliency fund needs to take those kinds of factors into consideration. It's really important to understand that and develop a plan for how you would create and use a resiliency fund.
I agree completely. What Bill had said is really the beginnings of the components of a budget narrative and specific to Dewey. And I very much endorse what Liam said because it was back in 2021 when Dave Davis was doing the comprehensive plan update that it was added in that there should be a comprehensive plan for resiliency, which was really the birth of this committee, I think.
So I want to go back to Gary. You were talking about things that our committee had voted on and what,
Yeah, let me mention a couple of other things.
Please.
One is the notion of a storm, actually three things, a storm reconstruction ordinance. I haven't really done very much on that. I mean, I think and Dave Thomas has done a little bit on this too. We've kind of looked for some model ordinances. I don't think we've uncovered anything at this point, and there may not be anything that we could use as a model. So there's more work to be done there.
I have a brief story on that, but that
Well, let me
Maybe
just,
later in the agenda.
let's go ahead and keep focused on some of these things. Just briefly, in terms of the sea level rise disclosure for real estate, that was one of the other things that was a part of the recommendations that the committee voted on last year, the year before. Just one other, we've already talked about this a little bit, but one thing I think is important is to understand the information that is available to prospective buyers about the flood risk for properties. There's a lot of information that's out there. It may not be necessarily on the real estate disclosure forms, but And if you look at Realtor.com, if you look at Zillow.com, if you look at Redfin, you'll see there's a new organization that has marketed its services to all three of those organizations. It actually characterizes the likelihood of a particular property experiencing a flood event. I think it's important to understand what that is about, what that means. It doesn't necessarily mean that the 100-year flood event, it's not the possibility of a 100-year flood event happening. I think it's just kind of a general characterization, that you may have, several inches of water in your property over the next 25 years, 30 years, whatever the time frame
It's a numerical score, 1 to 10.
It's a percentage, it's actually presented as a probability. There's
Well, and
a
some of the things
70% chance that
Some of the
you,
things I read were a lot of 30 years, because a lot of people have 30-year mortgages.
I'm sorry,
A
what?
lot of people have 30-year mortgages.
Right.
So they use that number often, and how often that would
Right.
flood in.
So I just think as part of that whole effort, it's important to understand that there's some additional work that needs to be done there. The last thing that I want to mention is there was an expressed concern about, do we have enough in terms of contact information sources? How does that play into long-range planning? I think, again, the meeting that we went to in South Bethany, we now have a list of contacts for all of the municipalities except for Fenwick Island, but that should be easy to develop. That can certainly be shared with anyone. I don't know that, I didn't get any sense that there would be any resistance from any of the municipalities that were around the table to sharing information about their efforts on resilience and their efforts on sea level rise or climate change. Bill's always a good source for what's going on in other communities. You can always ask me questions too, but again, I think each individual committee member, if there's something you want to know, we can give you the list of contacts and you can certainly pose those questions on your own. And obviously come back and share the answers with the committee, hopefully, but I think we're in a better position now with that list of contacts and knowing what other municipalities are doing than we were a couple of months ago when we were still worried about how to pursue this.
So this would be a good, and you referenced it, a good segue to you and Kelly talking about what happened when you went to that South Bethany meeting,
Yeah.
please.
It was well attended, and I put in our notes that, everybody was very open and generous with their ideas and thoughts and what they're doing. One thing I came away from was just how different all of our towns are, and they are very specific things that they're each doing. Resiliency, I think we should definitely speak to each town and understand exactly what they're doing and learn from them, and maybe that's what we can do as a subcommittee. I put in, I think everybody got a copy of the notes, just communicating with Fenwick in general, I think it's a big picture item too, because we do share that inlet and the bay is our biggest source of flooding. Lewis did go through a very rigorous process, from what I understood, about their communications, and that would be a good resource for us in terms of looking at what they've done to communicate with the town. Because it sounded like it was a little contentious at times as well, because people are talking about, their property values ultimately. That came out very clear from that conversation. And learning more from every community. Resiliency and Freeport were the main thrusts, and certainly things we can address now. I did think it would be a good idea to offer to reciprocate and host a meeting at some point in the future, to Gary's point, not until we have something to say,
Right.
but just to keep the lines of communication open and be magnanimous. And whether it's here in this space or we get Starboard House over there or something to update, I think that would be an easy thing to do and keep relationships going.
When you all concluded that meeting, was there talk that this become a regular event, or was it contemplated that this was one time unless somebody else took action?
I don't recall any specific discussion or comments about, doing this again, or there was no one ruled it out, certainly. I think everybody thought it was a valuable meeting, but there were no talks about plans for doing it in the
That
future.
was my idea.
But I think Kelly's right. If we have, can target it, focus it in the right way, I think it would be good to get these people back together again. We don't want to have a duplication of the meeting we just had. We want to have people coming in doing their own little show on,
Yeah.
where they've been and where they're going. I think it would have to be more focused than that for it to be productive. But
So maybe something that hypothetically was a year from now, can you update from
Could
where
be.
you were at the last meeting?
it could be, or something even more focused if we wanted to focus
Maybe
on a
topic.
specific issue. What have you done on resiliency?
Yeah,
Just
that
call it
probably would
that.
be like a workshop.
Yeah.
The one thing I would say that I thought, who was the woman who spoke at the end? She was, the idea of knowing who has what resources and how you could possibly share, I think is a good way to reach out to other communities. Do we have sand trucks that we can help share if they have something that, I don't know what our resources are. What businesses have done. If Starboard can't build up 3 more feet, do they have their stoves and their food up on shelves? How long would it take them to reopen if we had a massive flood tomorrow? Who's stuck, elderly, retiring here, do they have the resources to evacuate? So those were some of the things that I hadn't really considered that got brought up in a general discussion.
Do you believe that just some of what you've mentioned, it's got my wheels turning, would be something that our committee should explore further to figure out if that's something that we also need to recommend, is to figure out things such as, do we have older people living by themselves that nobody's checking on, or how
Well,
would we do
it's
that?
sort of a question, I don't know if the town has this, do the businesses have a flood plan for themselves? I don't know the answer to that.
How would we find that information out?
Well,
Talk to the business partnership, I suppose, to see if they have any thoughts about it.
Is that something that could be, I assume there's, I'm gonna call it like a chamber of commerce or something of that sort, that businesses in this area regularly meet and discuss issues?
Well, that's really the Dewey Business Partnership, I believe.
Okay, is it?
I mean, they sponsor a number of events, but, I don't know the extent to which.
So the 2 big partners are Dewey Beach Business Partnership. They meet twice a year, in the spring and the fall. Jimmy O'Connor, Monty Montgomery, and Drew from the Hyatt are the 3 folks in Kelly Raniere that run that. And then Highway 1 is the other big organization, which is Alex Pyrus' organization. Those are the 2 that have a lot of the businesses here in town. There's a number of smaller businesses that are kind of on their own, but really those are the 2 if you wanted to get information out or find information out about businesses.
So,
But I mean, I'm thinking of, the power goes out for 3 days and all their food's in the freezer and has to be cooked, and Jose Andres comes and feeds the town, I don't know if they've thought about those things.
so would it be helpful to have somebody from our committee touch base with at least these key people that Bill has identified and just find out generally, do you have a specific plan for if there's a flood? And if they say yes, can you share it? And maybe bring that back to,
So you want that to be part of the Resilience Fund subcommittee?
do you think it belongs within the same context of that?
Yes.
Because that's resiliency fund, this is kind of something separate,
But
but,
plan, which we're asking ultimately a consultant.
so I guess it could go in that as well. And maybe since you attended that meeting, that you could take the lead on that and contact those business owners and bring back, as part of what you all share, this is what we learned, they do or don't have a specific business plan.
Oh, that's good, okay.
Would that be okay? Gary,
And I'll ask specific contacts from Bill.
Gary, did you have other items?
There's one other thing I want to mention, I don't have to do it right now, maybe you want to finish everything that's on your agenda, it's just something I want to add to it.
Please.
Okay, well, as we started talking through, this is at the commissioner level, started talking through the issue of increasing the freeboard, It seemed to me that there was a lot of confusion and not misunderstanding, but lack of understanding perhaps about what homeowners in a flood zone really could do within the construct of our town code. And it seemed that there was some lack of clarity there. And so the notion here was that we revisit using a scenario approach, developing a number of scenarios. Just for example, if an owner has a 3-story house that was built before the adoption of the flood insurance rate maps, and it's in a particular flood area, let's say it's in the AE6 flood area and the land is already 1 foot above sea level, the house is damaged by a fire or maybe by a storm, and it's more than 50% of the value of the structure. What could that homeowner do at that point? How does the homeowner meet the requirements of that, of the FEMA and the requirements of the town with respect to freeboard? If that property, in elevating and meeting the FEMA requirements for elevation in the town freeboard, what happens if that property then would exceed the 32 feet height limit? Should there be a waiver for them without having to reconstruct their entire house? What if that property extends 2 feet into a setback area? Should that homeowner still be able to raise that property and maintain that existing part of the house that is in the setback area? There are some answers currently in the code. They're not entirely clear. The idea was to develop these kinds of scenarios, take them to the Charter and Code Review Committee, and ask them what their thoughts are in terms of what seems to be fair. What do we want property owners to be able to do? And then, extended that to talk to this committee as well. It's not, technically within climate change, but it could be certainly affected by climate change. And the probability that any given house is affected by, storms and, catastrophic events that are related to climate increase each year. And so there's more likelihood. So let's, if we can, this is not a technical question. It's just, if you're presented with a scenario, what do you think is fair to the homeowner? What should we build into our code to allow homeowners to do? So it's kind of an additional piece that we'd like to bring to this committee. And I can't be more specific about that because I haven't really developed the scenario approach very well yet, either for Charter and Code or for this group. But that's the plan at this point.
That's what I was going to ask you, is how would you like us to respond to that, or is it premature?
Just to be aware that is an approach that we want to take. We want to bring those scenarios to this committee and get the reactions of the membership of the committee.
So today I'm hearing that this is contemplated, but you don't want us to take action, or you do want us to?
There's no action to take at this point. It's just a charge from the commissioners to this committee. There needs to be some additional work done before anything is ready to present to either to you or to the Charter and Code Review Committee.
So it's anticipated this is work for this committee in the future.
Right.
There was also a question about whether there was a liaison person from Dewey in general for each of the towns, and you were going to share with us if you were able to ascertain that.
Well, we do have the list of contacts in each of the towns as a result of the South Bethany meeting, so I think that's the best list to go to. In terms of somebody here in town, but Dewey, Bill's probably the best contact. He is, has the best relationships, I think, with all of the other towns and, knows pretty much what's going on. So he's probably the best contact. I'm happy you can direct questions to me as well, and I may end up sending him to Bill anyway, so.
So I'm hearing that generally you serve that purpose, but you're not officially with that title as the town liaison to the other towns.
No, I do communicate with the town managers often when there's a question about how they're doing things compared to what we're doing here in Dewey. Whether it's presenting their budgets, how they do it, or whether it's addressing snow removal. You gotta ask other folks how they do things, so you can.
So
maybe our way is not the best way.
Yeah, you learn from each other.
in our resiliency subcommittee here, should we speak to you first and say, who should we talk to at Fenwick, and we have these questions? Is that the
Well, I
best
think from the
model?
meeting you had in South Bethany, those are
Just
the
use
folks you
this.
need to probably
Just go
talk
straight to them. I
Yes.
just don't want to
Because I'll go to the
bombard
town.
them with
I'll go to the town managers down there, the assistant
Okay.
town managers, and ask them questions, but for that group that was in South Bethany, those should be the folks about
Okay.
resiliency.
So we
Yeah.
will go directly to them.
So Mary, I'm going to ask you whether or not you have already addressed what we have as G, which is what information is being provided to potential property owners regarding flooding in Dewey. Is that something that you think we've already discussed through Dawn and just generally today and previously, or do you think that needs to be addressed further?
No, I think we addressed it at the beginning.
The only thing I would say is that Lewis, in our notes, we put, they had the make way for the bay, make way for the river, and they took a lot of information from, what the Dutch do, which is basically getting used to the idea of it's coming, so just get over it. Kind of make room for it in your mind that this is an event that's likely gonna happen. And that was a large part of their communication to the public.
Yeah, I feel like that is the underlying goal here, is to get people to buy into
Right.
this is a problem, something needs to be done, and to get the support from the homeowners. Is that, I talked to my neighbors about this meeting, and they're like, oh, let us know when we need to worry about something. And I'm like, I don't need to worry about something, but there's not that feeling, even though, we got
Make way
flooding.
for the bay, yeah.
Yeah, that we just keep in mind that it's not just education, but providing that motivation and the why that people should do something or be concerned. I mean, you can tell there's water. How do you buy a house here and not think about flooding?
So I want to go to point H with Gary and Dave Thomas. Ordinances related to storm reconstruction measures. Something you want to add for that?
Well, I mean, I tried to cover that, but we really need to do some more work on that. I don't think we found a model ordinance. I don't think we haven't even gotten our arms around that yet.
I just wanted to make sure we had
Yeah.
addressed that as thoroughly as you all wanted.
Right.
Well, I experimented with ChatGPT the other day. And the question was, is there a small town that had adopted a storm reconstruction ordinance and then had a catastrophe and was happy that they had done that? And their answer was Greenberg, Kansas had been hit by a tornado and destroyed. But it was only after that that they adopted that they were going to build the first LEED Platinum Town Hall in the country. They got a tremendous grant to do that. So I still haven't found a place, even one, that had such an ordinance before the event, and wow, it worked. Well, all right, well, what was the anatomy of it? It turns out it was a one-off project for the town hall, and it was tornado-centric out there. Now, hurricanes spawn tornadoes now. That's what Milton did down in Florida just a few months ago. So that is relevant to us, but it's been difficult. And then you get into what all exactly should be the anatomy of it. One of the things that I went to the Coastal Climate get-together in Georgetown back in November that was hosted by DENREC at the Cheers Center. And I talked to the folks there, and they referred me to DEMA, that's not really a DENREC area. And it came up at the meeting in South Bethany, and that was Danielle Swallow's idea that each town, do they have an emergency operation plan, an EOP? And what is the date of that plan? And when was the last time it was reviewed? And what are you going to do when the storm hits? What is your headquarters going to, and I was very interested that Bethany has property inland
Yeah. I heard.
where they have a center
Right.
there. And I have little doubt that that's the outgrowth of the town manager being the
Yeah,
former
it reminded me
superintendent of the state
of what a bunch
police.
of businesses did after 9/11. They had a satellite office.
They have a satellite office and that they have an ability to
In the-
communicate with their ambulances and their police cruisers from a distant location that is
That's very
secure and
sophisticated.
not in the flood zone.
So
And
when,
that's where they can remove all of their property so that it won't get drowned
Right.
in a deluge.
I'm not sure Dewey is big enough
Right.
to contemplate
It was
that.
very sophisticated.
So we do have a warehouse in West Rehoboth, right?
Okay.
That's over off of Hebron Road. It's a 2-story warehouse. It's been there for years, solar panels on the top. It could be turned into some type of emergency operations center. The new town hall, if it's approved and built, it's going to be at a level 4, which will sustain 125 mile an hour winds. It's going to have concrete floors through the whole building, and it's going to be steel framed. 132 posts will be driven into the ground. It will not be an evacuation center, but it will be an emergency command center
Right.
for our police department. So I mean, those are the things. And when it comes to equipment, Dewey Beach really does not have a lot of equipment. When I got here, we had 1 pickup truck. Since then, we've gotten 2 pickup trucks. And then we have a small van for our building inspection team to drive around and make sure everybody's getting permits, making sure that the folks that are doing work get business licenses. And believe me, that is paid for that one little van that we had with the increase in revenue since that person's been driving around checking on the job sites. But we really don't have a lot of equipment. We do have a skid loader, a Kubota. We use that in multiple different ways around town, whether it's snow removal, redoing the dunes where the beach mats are, things like that. But compared to the other towns, Dewey probably has the least amount of equipment.
I was like, can those paddy wagons go pick up elderly?
Has DEMA worked with the town
Case
at
of
all?
store,
Get the jolly trolley.
They might enjoy it. They're like, oh, I'm gonna paddy wagon.
So I attended a DEMA meeting last month up in Smyrna with Phil Crane, who's in charge of it, and he's the one that I'm working with the brick grant, them in Gap.
Okay.
So
So do we have a continuity of operation or emergency operation plan by some name like that?
there is one, and I pulled it. It was from 2012. I've given it to the chief and our dispatch supervisor to update.
Yeah, that was,
They're currently doing that.
that was Danielle's question, and my sense of the room there was that, yes, many of the coastal towns have some kind of planning, however, it's become dated.
It has.
And it needs to be reviewed and updated.
And
with-
then the other thing I would remind everybody about is that the town 3.5 years ago applied for a grant. We got $3 million from the Community Reinvestment Fund for the new town hall.
Right.
And then I applied last year again in the Community Reinvestment. I took a year off and applied again, wrote a grant for $2 million. And Senator Huxtable called and said, I'm sorry, we didn't get you the $2 million. We only got you $1 million. And I said, Senator, that was fine. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. So we've gotten $4 million from the state for our new town hall. So, I mean, we're out there looking for grants all the time. We're applying for grants all the time. It is competitive. We don't have a consultant. It's either myself writing them. Before I started writing, Ashley, that used to be our clerk, was writing them. Kate writes some of them also. So, I mean, we are trying to get as many grants as possible. I update our grants at every town meeting, and we upgrade our projects usually at the town meetings and in the newsletter. So, I mean, the information is being put out about all this. It's a matter of the people reading it.
Is that $1 million different than the $1 million for the emergency services part of the new town hall?
Emergency services.
The EMT unit, didn't we get $1 million for that?
We
Was that
did
the
not.
same one?
We
Oh,
did not.
get that.
No, we got $3 million for the town hall through a community reinvestment. I wrote it again for $2 million. I waited a year. We only got $1 million out of a bond bill on that one. Then we put it through Senator Coon's office for equipment for the police station to pay for a one-time payment of things. It's pending. It's $453,000. If the federal budget ever gets passed and it's still in there, it's out of the committee, it's sitting there, we will be able to use $453,000. But there isn't, the county had actually, for the paramedics, had asked for money for a new Suburban and a lot of equipment, and it didn't get approved. If that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, I just thought that we were looking to Sussex County for $1 million.
No, so what you're talking about, I'm sorry, we're getting off. So because the new town hall is being built in 2 phases. Phase 1 is the town hall and police station. And that'll go out on Route 1 where the parking enforcement building is. Phase 2 is our current town hall where it sits right now. If that gets funded, that will be torn down. Once the new town hall is built, we'll move into it, and then that current building that's 22 years old will get torn down. In that building will go the paramedics. The county is giving us $1 million to fund that, to go in there. So yes, they are. We signed an agreement with Todd Lawson, the county executive, for that $1 million, but that's in phase 2.
Right.
So if we only build phase 1, we're never going to see that funding.
Okay.
So
Bill, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that in 2012, there was an emergency plan that had been developed. Is that a plan that would address flooding emergencies like what happened in Asheville? Or what type of plan is that?
no, it talks about a continuity plan of like who's in charge. The mayor would make the decision, probably consulting with the commissioners and the police chief and myself, whether we should tell everybody they have to, leave the town. Because it's tough. You're telling business owners they have to shut down, and they don't want to shut down during storms. They want to stay open for the most part. So it talks about that, who has the powers to do that. It talks about the police department going around and telling folks they have to evac. And then it talks about the town establishing another command post. And I think the last time they did this during Sandy, of course I wasn't here for that, but they established it at one of the hotels out on Route 1 on the other side of the canal. It talks about things, and I looked at it and I said it has to be updated. Gave it to the chief.
And is that online?
Is that plan online? I don't think it is. I think it's in our, I don't think it's, I'll have to look if it's actually online.
If it is not online, is it something you could send to me and I could send it out to the committee?
Yeah, the issue in 2012, it wasn't, it could be scanned in, I guess. It looked like it was typed by somebody in our front office.
How many pages long is it, ballpark?
I think it was 12 pages.
Okay.
Is it something that our committee needs to read and give input to, or is it separately being addressed?
No, I don't think the committee would need to get involved in that. I think the police chief and our dispatch supervisor are the two that need to come up with the finished draft, and then it may or may not be presented to the commissioners to review. I think the resilience committee, my opinion is, needs to bullseye on maybe 1 or 2 things and kind of drive towards those, but really it's your committee, however you want to handle it.
In looking at the action items that we have, it appears to me that we've generally addressed all of those, but I want to put it out there if there's other information that you believe we have not addressed. While we didn't go specifically down each action item, it seems to me everything was basically incorporated into the other discussions, but if I missed something, I want to hear from the committee in that regard. Liam, did you want to chime in? No? Okay. Just unsure. Yes.
I stayed for lunch after the meeting down in South Bethany and spoke to the mayor, and I saw her again in Bethany when they had the meeting in December of the Association of Coastal Towns. And yes, I believe that it would be a good idea that she and the mayor of Bethany support that there be some rebirth or continuity of the Association of Coastal Towns. What occurred in South Bethany was really a variety of my understanding of what the conception of the Association of Coastal Towns was way back when Mayor Quillen here in Dewey signed the ordinance that we agreed that the town would join. And it did become inactive at least once, maybe another time of activity. At the recent end here, it had morphed into the concept that it wasn't the towns that were members of the Association of Coastal Towns, it was the mayors. board members.
What
But
is
this
it?
is really, I think this is really tangential. I mean, we're not looking to establish any kind of formal body with a formal organization. We just want to bring people together and share information.
Right.
And the ACT thing is a separate thing, and I think they decided to
They disbanded.
disband
They
it.
disbanded, I was at that meeting.
Yeah, so I mean, I think
After
that's really
ruling from the
tangential
AG's
to.
So what I wanted,
So I'm
Yeah.
following up with what was reported in the Coastal Point newspaper about the idea to carry on in some form or fashion. And really, it might very well be along the lines of what occurred at South Bethany.
I think
that
there
we-
was general
that we
consensus that
collaborate.
it be something that is looked at in the future, but we needed to figure out the focal points and make progress in our committee, and contemplated doing something like that maybe a year from now.
Okay,
So-
well, it was on the agenda and that
Well, and
was,
I guess one thing to note is just that the ACT no longer exists. Maybe that's. Yeah.
that's the bottom line. However, there are components of it who would like to carry on in some form or fashion.
Yeah, informally.
And I guess the question is do we share that desire? And I guess that gets in turn to some of the things that have come up, and that is, how does this committee communicate with the deliberative assembly that created us, which is the town council? And the answer in Robert's rules is, you have a report that is adopted by a majority of the committee and sent from the committee forth to the assembly that created it. That's the classical orthodox route of communication.
I'm not sure there's any issue in that. We've got
Yeah, I
Gary
mean, I
here,
think
we have
we're
Bill
kind of,
here,
we're kind of
and-
off track here, because we don't strictly follow Robert's Rules of Order anyway. We don't have to.
Does
Let's
the
just,
committee,
let's not.
are we supposed to follow Robert's rules?
There's no formal requirement that I'm aware of. It's certainly nothing in code or resolutions, anything like that, that we have to do something like that. We have our own, procedures, and we follow FOIA is what we really have to be most concerned about,
That's
making
what
sure that
I
we're
remember
following
when
that.
I
But I mean, I think, again,
came on
I
the
think we're-
committee, there was a packet of
I think
materials, and I
we're
thought
we're
Robert's
getting,
was in there.
we've got a committee member handbook, and I think everybody should pay attention to that and follow the procedures, but, I think we're gonna get, far afield if we go much further with that kind of discussion at this point.
So I think that we've generally gone through all of the items on the agenda. Is there anything else that I haven't covered or that you all believe should be on the agenda for next session? We missed our November meeting. I know we talked about meeting every other month. I would like to just generally understand whether you think it would be helpful to meet at the end of February, or if we want to stick to the every other month and put something in March. Any thoughts on that?
So February and then April.
That's correct, that's what
Yeah,
I,
because once we get into May, June, and July, it's a little, so I'm all for getting 2 more meetings in before May. However, we need to schedule that.
but again, those of you that are taking on the bulk of the work know whether that's going to make sense to you or not.
I do feel like what we were just tasked with is gonna take some time.
Okay, so we'll aim for a March meeting, and,
How about beginning of March, or not the end of March, so it's not quite 2 months?
I will take a look at the town's availability and send out a general email and find out some dates that seem to work the most for everybody. And Courtney just wanted everybody to know this was the one day she couldn't make it, but everybody else could, so I apologize for inconveniencing her, but she was very clear that she wished she had been able to be here. So I will do my best to try to maximize the date to accommodate everybody. And with that in mind, is there a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
And all in favor of adjourn?
We should be leaving.
Very good. The meeting is concluded.
Thank you.